The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you. A point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was first wondering why this is so low. I was wondering if you could let me know how the public being seated in the alcoves squares with Rule 2.40 of our House rules, which quite plainly doesn't allow for that. And I guess a second point of parliamentary inquiry, if you want, well, we can take them one at a time.
Representative Thiessen, as the Speaker of the House, given the authority to me under Rule 7.01, paragraph 3, except otherwise provided by the rule of law, the Speaker has general control of the chamber of the House and of the corridors, passages, and rooms of the Capitol and the State Office Building under the jurisdiction of the House. So this, as Speaker, I have made the decision because the third floor gallery is not available to allow the public access to the chamber, and we are using that the alcove in the back as our temporary gallery.
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Representative Thiessen, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you. Just so folks following along, Rule 2.40 says any other person may be issued a permit by the Speaker, good for the day, but that person must be seated near the Speaker's rostrum. It goes on to say the alcoves in the chamber are for the use of members only, and the Sergeant-at-Arms must keep them clear of others. And it says that that rule can be suspended only under extraordinary conditions. No motion has been made to suspend the rules whatsoever. And then if you look at 9.001, which you cited, or 7.01, which you cited to, I guess my parliamentary inquiry is, what do the words "except otherwise provided by rule" mean?
Representative Thiessen, under that authority given to me by the rules, I have declared that this alcove on the east side of the chamber will be used as our public viewing gallery for the purposes of this session. And if you have it isn't appropriate for us to get into a debate on the House floor, which I know you are well aware. If you have a problem with my ruling and decision on that, then I'd invite you to stand and make a point of order.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I reluctantly rise for a point of order under Rule 2.40.
Representative Thiessen rises to a point of order under Rule 2.40.
I'd like to offer advice.
To your point of order, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I do reluctantly rise to this because if there's anything that's more fundamental, it's that we have access to the public. The decisions made by the majority to hold session in a construction zone this year, a decision that very easily could have been made differently and been held elsewhere where the public would have actually had access to their legislators and more than the handful of people that can sit in the back of the gallery, we'd be in a very different situation here. That was a decision made by this majority, and let's be very clear. There was authority when Speaker Zellers was the Speaker to preserve this space and the Senate space if the bodies wanted that to be the case. Obviously, the Senate has made a different choice to convene this year in a different place. And a year ago, it was clear to this body by a letter from the Department of Administration that it would have been a cheaper alternative and a more accessible public alternative to have our meetings in the Senate office building. That was one of the options. There were several. Nonetheless, the Speaker and the Majority Leader decided to have this session in a construction zone. I find that problematic. But more importantly, or as importantly as that, so that's one of the reasons I rise to this point of order, but more importantly than that, this rule is very, very clear. I read it to you. It says, the alcoves in the chamber are for use of members only, and the sergeant at arms must keep them clear of others. It says, other persons may come in by permit of the Speaker for that day, but the person must be seated near the Speaker's rostrum. It is very clear. There are no exceptions. Now, one thing we could do, of course, is come in every day, suspend the rules, and then let the public come in. Another thing we could do is actually have a Rules Committee meeting and change the permanent rules. But this is very clear. And to the authority that you cite, Mr. Speaker, basically what you're saying, because, again, under 7.01, it says you have general control of the chamber except as otherwise provided by rule. The rule says that the alcove is not available for the public. So essentially what we're seeing here is a pattern. We saw it at the end of last session where we had a bill that came up on the House floor with 2 minutes left to go, nearly 100-page bill. No one had read the bill. No one, even the author, even the Speaker, didn't know what was in the bill. That bill passed with 1 minute left to go in clear violation of the rules. And this is a pattern. Basically, what the Speaker is saying, members, and Mr. Speaker, what you're saying is that under Rule 7.01, you have the authority to do anything you want. We're setting a new rule here, which apparently is the rule that the Speaker wants to go by, which is the Speaker does not need to play by the same rules as everybody else. That's what we see here today, members. And so, Mr. Speaker, this rule is eminently clear. You can't rely on 7.01 because there is actually an explicit rule that limits your authority to control the House floor. You need to find in favor of this point of order.
Representative Thiessen, again, members, has risen to a point of order under Rule 2.40 to presumably have the public removed from the House chamber. Advice for the Speaker on the point of order. The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
State your advice.
Thank you. Members, the Speaker has already clearly stated the rule. Under 7.01, it says, the Speaker must preserve order and decorum. It further says the Speaker has general control of the House and of the corridors. Members, this is a historic and necessary renovation of the Capitol. It's unprecedented. It creates challenges that we haven't seen before, and if to the extent we're creating any precedent, the precedent won't be enacted again until there's another Capitol renovation. The Speaker, in his job and his authority, has made a good faith effort to allow public access to the Capitol. And I'm really surprised that the minority would bring this forward and presumably doesn't want the public to have access for it. Representative Thiessen, you brought a good point forward, and I want to remind the body that The minority leader is the former Speaker of the House. And as Speaker of the House, he had the authority to make this change himself. But in fact, in the bonding bill that this passed in, the language, which Representative Thiessen, you voted for twice, and many members on your side did as well, it says construction work shall be sequenced to maintain occupancy in the House of Representatives and Senate chambers during regular legislative sessions, et cetera, unless otherwise approved by the Speaker of the House. Further, in January of 2015, the Capital Preservation Committee, which you had members on, same thing. The House chambers plan to be utilized for the 2016 session. Additionally, members, we took a vote and had a long discussion, and I'm a little offended because I spent a lot of time and effort to discuss the House rules. I took that job very seriously. Representative Thiessen, I asked you no fewer than 4 times if you had changes that you would want to move forward with in the House rules. Additionally, I emailed all members. I met with many members separately. A couple members from your side of the aisle had suggestions. We discussed those. I discussed them with you as well. And you had no suggestions for change of rules. You, when you were in charge, allowed this to happen. It's already paid for. In fact, I have a note that says they looked into this. The cost would have been $300,000 for the House to move the chambers to the Senate Legislative Office Building and $500,000 for the Armory, and there's no additional cost here. The cost was already built in. It says right here, you can read it yourself. Of course, you know that. But more importantly, again, Mr. Speaker, my advice is that the Speaker of the House has authority, control, the decorum, and the flow on the House floor. And it's really disturbing to me that we would not want to have access from the members of the public. So if we were to follow through and let's say the Speaker makes a ruling and the members were to decide whether or not we should allow access in the House floor, be very clear that what Representative Thiessen wants to do would deny public access to the House floor, and that is very frustrating because I think that transparency requires that we let members of the public come here, and the Speaker has exercised good faith in making that happen. And so I would ask you, Mr. Speaker, to make this point of order, that you do not accept this point of order.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My advice to you is to find the point of order well taken and to find an appropriate place for this body to meet that the public has access. Mr. Speaker, only certain members of the public have access to this space, and it is my understanding that a person with a physical disability would not be able to access the space that we have available. And I would ask the Majority Leader, if someone were to bring a complaint against the Minnesota House of Representatives for failure to make reasonable accommodations to a person with a disability, what we would say. Mr. Speaker, the only way for people to get in is to come upstairs to get into the House observing space. And if there is some provision for members of the public who have a disability, I think that needs to be explained.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Lesch. State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the rules are clear. I think we can all admit here on the floor the rules are clear that this is a violation of the rules. Now, it may be that you're correct in saying that it was really important that we do this in order to give 20 people in the state of Minnesota of the public access to the House chamber during our debates. I would suggest that isn't giving access, 20 people. That's a quick count. Maybe they could, if that's different, someone could tell me different. But Mr. Speaker, it's not true what Representative Pepin says, that it's Representative Thiessen's fault that this occurred. We had a different venue that we had an option for, and Representative Thiessen could have relied on the fact that you were all going to follow your own rules. He didn't expect that you weren't going to follow your own rules. Members, and Mr. Speaker, we make the rules here for the rest of Minnesota. Let the irony sink in for just a second that when we pass laws and rules for everyone else to follow, that we should follow our own set of rules. When word gets out here, and I see all these cameras back here, that we're not following our own rules, who's to say that members of the public aren't going to say they can't even follow their own rules? Why should we obey their own laws and rules that they set for us? The irony should be sunk in, Mr. Speaker. I ask that you find Representative Thiessen's point of order well taken.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not about denying the public access to the House floor. You had plenty of options, Majority Leader Pepin and Speaker Dowd. You could have moved to suspend the rules today, to suspend this rule. You didn't take that option. You could have taken up the Rules Committee knowing this was coming and actually made a change to the rules. That could have gone through the Rules Committee. That would have been a very easy option. The bottom line, though, is exactly what Representative Lesch said. We have 20 people at the most from the state of Minnesota, the public of Minnesota, that can be here. We can't have anybody out in the corridors. We can't have anybody, that face-to-face interaction that's so important. So we are not the ones denying public access to the House chambers. And the Speaker could, even if he rules as he should correctly in favor of this point of order, there's many options left. You could suspend the rules. You could go to Rules Committee and actually change the rules. But what you're doing is what you've done over and over and over again while you're in charge, which is try to take a shortcut around the rules. We've developed this culture in this body in the last year where people think it's okay to take a shortcut around the rules, to ask for special favors, to try to undermine the integrity of the rules that we're supposed to follow in this body. And Representative Pepin, you did not discuss this with us. The 4 times you were talking about it was in January of 2015, before we even knew that this would be a more costly alternative, before we even knew and that you had alternative choices. And the language that you read from that bill says exactly that, unless otherwise decided by the Speaker. The Speaker clearly last spring, could have made a very different choice. He didn't make that choice for purely political reasons because you didn't want to be seen sitting in the Senate office building because you want to make a political issue out of it again next year, I suppose. That's what this is about. It's pure politics at the expense of public access, at the expense of our democracy, and that's just not okay. And if the Speaker rules against this point of order, it's going to be another offense against the integrity of this body, and we shouldn't stand for it. Mr. Speaker, you should uphold this point of order.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry. Can I do that under advice? Or can I just do it under advice?
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, you're relying on your general control of the House chamber to override Rule 2.40 or simply to ignore it. My question for you, Mr. Speaker, is are there any other rules that you plan to ignore based on your general control of the House chamber, just so the body is advised of that?
Unfortunately, that does not relate to the order in front of us. Any further advice?
In that case, advice, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pinto, state your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm on the Rules Committee, and the problem with overriding and ignoring a rule in the way that the Speaker is doing is that it means, to say the Majority Leader, there'd be no reason to ask for any changes in the rules because the Speaker can simply make whatever ruling the Speaker wants at any point. Rule 2.40 did not get added to the rules yesterday. It's been in the rules for a long time. It was quite clear that the majority could have, if they wanted to do this, could have requested suspension of the rules, could have addressed this in advance. If we simply ignore the languages in the rules, where it says, except as provided in the rule, there is a clear rule, then in that case, we can have any speaker, and may I point out of any party, make whatever ruling that speaker wants. I'd advise the body the point is well taken, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members' advice.
State your advice.
My advice is to rule that this is the challenge is in order against and that we're not complying with Rule 2.40. We have had a very long tradition that says anyone who wants to visit us on the floor has to go through an orderly process. And it's in our current rules. They could have been amended by a simple Rules Committee meeting in which we could work together, in which you had to make a request to the Sergeant at Arms. And the Sergeant at Arms had to know who that person was. They had to assure that their purpose was not to lobby us or to influence our decisions, but their intention was to be an honored guest. And we entrusted the Sergeant at Arms, working with the Speaker's office, to give priority, for example, to international guests and people of high honor over someone who's just curious, a constituent of any one of us. And there was a very orderly process in which the person who came here was granted a special privilege and a special pass. We are now told it's first come, first served. We have no idea on what basis. It appears there's no basis except showing up first in line, or if it's in a line, I don't know, maybe you can email and request in advance. We've got no information on how this would work. And you know, this is going to be a trying session for all of us because we are in an active construction zone. And I think it really sets the tone wrong when we start out with just fiats rather than together coming up with shared ways to problem solve the challenges of working in a closed building that's an active construction site. And I think that's what the people want of us. They would like us to have a rules committee to discuss the options, to come up with a tradition that works in an unusual session that honors our priorities and creates a respectful process that's understood by all the members and the members of the public.
Further advice, the member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I ask you to find the point of order not well taken. Members, just to be clear, I'm not sure if you've all got a copy of your rules book. I ask you to read 7.01. We do have the authority. We're not breaking any rules. The authority is granted right under 7.01. This is, obviously it's not going to happen again. It's a historic change. The Speaker made very good faith effort. He spent months working on this to make sure that we had access to the public. And frankly, this argument is baffling to me. I cannot believe that you're trying to prevent members of the public from having access to the Capitol. I don't understand this argument at all. I don't understand which point you're trying to make. Representative Hortman, you made a point about being ADA compliant. We've been working diligently. We've been working with the community. It is ADA compliant. The community is comfortable with where we're at on that. And Representative Lesh, I'm sorry, you talked about irony. The irony for me here is I cannot believe that members of this body are actually arguing against members of the public having access. This is ridiculous. We know that the Speaker needs to maintain control and decorum on the House floor. We have, regardless of which side has the Speaker. And the Speaker has done everything in his power, and I've worked with him, we've worked together, we've worked with staff to make things as seamless as possible, and we made it a priority to have access for members of the public in a very challenging time. And members, many of you in this body voted for this Capitol restoration, and so did I, because it's important that it happened. But I don't think there's one person out there in Minnesota that's watching this that can even believe that this is going on. When things are under construction, you have to make some modifications. The Speaker did what's right for the people of Minnesota. He worked with our security, with our chief sergeant, with our chief's clerk staff to make reasonable accommodations under these circumstances that we have so that we can restore this beautiful building. And I cannot even believe that this is a discussion point. Why we would want to remove public access is beyond me. And why you continue to argue that we're breaking the rules when it very clearly says in Rule 7.01, this isn't even a discussion point. Mr. Speaker, I ask you to rule this point of order. You've gotten enough advice. I ask you to rule that this point of order is not well taken.
Members, I have received enough advice, and on the motion, point of order on Rule 2.40, after reviewing that particular rule, and upon receiving the advice of Representatives Thiessen, Pepin, Hortman, Lesh, Pinto, and Loeffler, I find the point of order not well taken, and I further order that the public shall not be removed from the gallery.
Mr. Speaker, point of order under Rule 2.41.
Representative Thiessen rises to a point of order under Rule 2.41. To your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice.
State your advice.
Rule 2.41 says that accredited representatives of the press must be given equal press privileges by the House. As I understand the protocol, many members of the press, particularly today, including some press that has come down from the Iron Range to cover the discussion about the workers on the Iron Range, who we hopefully will pass a clean bill to get them their unemployment insurance benefits extended today, can't get here. They're not allowed on the House floor. That's in clear violation of House File 2.41. And maybe the same argument that the chief clerk, surprisingly, advice is going to give is that you can do that under Rule 7.01. But I'm not sure where Representative Pepin went to law school, but it says, except as otherwise provided by rule or law, which you keep ignoring. I think your law professors would tell you that that actually modifies the rest of the thing, the rest of the paragraph, and the paragraph would refer back to the rule, which would not give the Speaker the power to do that. So, Mr. Speaker, I would rise to a point of order under Rule 2.41 and say that you need to let all members of the press who have credentials onto the House floor.
Representative Thiessen rises to a point of order under Rule 2.41. Any advice for the Speaker? The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Thiessen. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask you to find this point of order not well taken. Again, I think the press understands and everyone understands out there that we have limited access at the Capitol, and the Speaker has done everything possible. And really, this is really more of an attack on our staff, our Chief Sergeant, and our staff that has made an attempt to make accommodations possible. The press is normally somewhat limited in space. I'm sure if we can work with our staff for when that bill comes up, perhaps we could find space to put it in. It does not require, it's not a violation of the rule. We can continue to work with you to make sure if a reporter needs to get in here, we can work with the Chief Sergeant. But really, it's really, you know, the fact that we're even having this discussion is ridiculous. So now, you know, you're making a big deal out of the press not having access to this when, you know, you've made no attempt earlier at all to discuss this issue with, I don't believe, me or the Speaker. And I'm not sure if you've checked with the Sergeant at Arms, but I would, if you have, I'd like to hear about that discussion. And I'd be happy to work with the Chief Sergeant to make sure that Iron Range reporter would have an opportunity to get on the House floor.
Members, having reviewed the rule and under the advice of Representatives Thiessen and Pepin, I find the point of order not well taken. Reports of standing committees and divisions.
Mr. Speaker, you just ignored me.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to appeal the ruling of the chair. And ask for a roll call.
Representative Liebling has moved to appeal the ruling of the chair and has requested a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. To your motion, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. So members, what we're here talking about today is not a building, because this legislature at the end of the day is not a building. What our government is about is the rule of law. And that is what Minnesotans should be paying attention to here today. The law and rules. We establish rules as a body. We are not governed by a speaker who is a king, who gets to make up his own rules. We are governed by rules that are made in the ordinary course. And what we're doing today, and what the majority seems to be doing here, what the Speaker seems to be doing, is saying that he has the ability to decide what the rules will be. No matter what is written in this yellow book, no matter what this body has voted on, just as Representative Pinto was alluding to, if we say that he can ignore the rules that are in this book and base this on another section that I think Representative Thiessen has pointed out very effectively does not give him the authority to do that, then what you are saying is that rules don't apply, that the Republican majority does not have to abide by the rules. And that, I think, is a very, very dangerous road to go down. And I would hope that a member like Representative Pepin, who is an attorney, would know that that is not a road that we want to go down in the state of Minnesota. It's a very dangerous precedent. We've seen an awful lot of that in the first year of this two-year term, especially at the end when the Speaker pretty much went off on his own and decided that it was okay to have a vote on a bill that members hadn't even read. But now today, right away, starting out in the session, no matter what the underlying merits or demerits of these provisions may be, the point is that the Speaker does not get to make the rules. The rules are what are in this book. And if there's a rule in here and it says something very plain, the Speaker doesn't just get to say it isn't so, no matter how convenient that may be. So members, I appeal to you to vote to not uphold the ruling of the Speaker, because this is a very important principle. These matters can be dealt with through the Rules Committee. They could be dealt with by suspending the rules, but they should not be dealt with by simply having the Speaker decide what the rules will be because that is convenient. That is the way to tyranny, and we must not let that start to happen now.
Members, as a reminder, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, as I'm looking at 2.41, one thing I see is that television stations must be permitted to televise sessions of the House. Well, I'm looking over in the alcove and I see a number of cameras. I assume that we are upholding that rule today. There are television cameras here and they are filming the proceedings of the House. It also says that the press must be granted equal press privileges by the House. Now, if there is someone from the Iron Range, a reporter here today that for some reason has not been able to get access, you already heard the Majority Leader say that she was willing to work to make sure that they got access on an important day like this. But it doesn't say that every single reporter that shows up has to be given access. I mean, hypothetically, what if 1,000 reporters show up here? I mean, there's not room for 1,000 reporters or maybe a smaller number to show up. I mean, it's reasonable to have some amount of limitation on just how many people are coming if, in fact, we just don't have room for them. Now, I guess I'm not aware myself of anyone who's been turned away. I guess that's an issue that the Majority Leader has says she's willing to work on. But the rule says equal press privileges. I certainly am all for the press having as much access as we can give them. But I think we also have to understand that there are some limits in terms of just physical space as to how much access can be given. And we certainly have the press over in the alcove. They're filming this now. There are going to be no secrets here from the public.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Knobloch, you just made my point for me. Actually, at 12:15, my message reads from an accredited press, which are the folks we're talking about. We have one of a few news stations. Hi, Jason. I'm having a hard time getting into the session. Media availability is a little tight. So I guess I really don't see how, if I have, a few news stations, of which this is a very accredited news station, how that allows equal access based on your advice that you just gave.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Good God, how long are we going to do this? There is a remedy in the rules that we can follow. We can get it done. All we have to do is follow the rules. And it's in there. I mean, I'm pretty sure that at least I will vote to suspend the rules. But the fact that it's being done so arbitrarily, and frankly, the spin that the Majority Leader keeps trying to put on this is ridiculous. Because if we really wanted the public in, we'd meet somewhere else. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I ask questions of other members during a point of, can I ask other members to yield during a point of parliamentary inquiry, or during a point of order?
Representative Pepin, you really should confine your remarks to the appeal and the question before the body. Maybe if you'd like, you could ask them offline in the chamber here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry to the Speaker. Is that allowed?
Yes. State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
I'm looking at the rule, and the rule says verbatim, a person wishing to report proceedings of the House may apply to the Chief Sergeant at Arms for a media pass and assignment to suitable available space. And the confusion I have here is what media has not been allowed to come into the alcove. If there's a problem with the sergeant not allowing someone to be in here that needs to be in here from the range, as I said earlier, I'd like to fix the problem. If maybe Representative Heeson, if you could provide that name, and I will make sure that members of the public, or excuse me, members of the media who would like to get into this proceeding because of the issues we're addressing today, I'd be happy to direct them if you could just let me know. So, Mr. Speaker, to the actual point, I'd ask you to find this. I guess we're on the members. This is a question to the body, but members, I'd ask you to find the appeal. I'd find it with the Speaker because this is an argument that frankly is a lot more political than it is reality, and I don't think there's any press that hasn't come into my knowledge. If there is, let me know, and I will work with the chief. I pledge I will work with the chief sergeant. And again, they may apply for a pass, and if it's a suitable space, the sergeant should allow it. And if there's any issue, I want to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Representative Pepin. To respond to your point of parliamentary inquiry, I did check with staff. I am not aware of any media outlets who have been excluded from the proceedings today. Not aware of any of them. Further discussion on the question. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Advice to the body. I think if you'd actually talk to the press, you'd find out lots of people who weren't able to get in here. There's many more than 15 members of the press who have come here, especially to the open day of Capitol. You heard from Representative Metza of some press from the Iron Range who are not allowed to be in. But what I'm hearing Representative Pepin say is that we set this rule of 15, but now we're not going to follow that rule either. We're going to let other people come in. As many as can be accommodated, because we're going to let the chief clerk, as I understand the rule, the limitation is 15 members of the press can be here at any given time, and they have to be stuck back in that alcove. They can't be on the floor like they have in the past to talk to us before session. They're going to be, that's the rule you sent out to the press last night at 7 p.m. And we have a copy of that. If you want a copy of the thing you actually sent to the press, I can get that to you. So you've put great limitations. I'm surprised at Representative Knobloch's argument that the First Amendment matters so little that we can kind of pick and choose when we want to honor it and when we don't want to honor it. I thought he'd be a man of the First Amendment. But that is what this point of order is really all about. Are we going to have free access to the press to be able to conduct their business, to listen to the session, to come and interview us and ask us hard questions about what's going on related to this legislative session? And the rules that you have put in place don't allow it. And again, it's a choice you could have avoided. You put a big do not enter sign on the Capitol when you made the choice to meet in this building instead of a cheaper alternative in the Senate office building, where all these issues would have not been a problem. So your decision to put a do not enter sign to the people, to the press, to the public on this building is the wrong way to go, and you're going to compound it, members, when you vote to uphold the ruling of the Speaker, saying it's okay that we only have 15 members of the press coming into this building. You know, last year Minnesota received a D- for openness and transparency. It seems to me, with the actions you're taking on this very first day of session, the House Republican Caucus is striving for an F this year. We can do better than this. Please vote with us to override the ruling of the Speaker and allow, at least, if you're not going to allow more members of the public to come in here, at least allow their representatives in the press to be here to interview us, to record the proceedings, so people know what's going on.
Any further discussions on the question before the body? Seeing no further discussion, and as a reminder, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll on the question. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes and 60 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand.